Right, there is a reason for the kind of surprise seating set up this morning. Some people freaked out when they came in this room this morning. It's not actually that different. But it's here to make a point. We are centered on communion. And the reason we're sat like that is because I want to show us that what is centralized in this room ought to be centralized in our lives. That's the point. And I want to show you that from Matthew's Gospel. So in your Bible, have a look or listen along to Matthew chapter 26 from verse 17. Matthew records, "On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, 'Where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat the Passover?' He replied, 'Go into the city to a certain man and tell him, the teacher says, my appointed time is near. I'm going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house.' So the disciples did as Jesus directed them and prepared the Passover." Now, just clock there that 4 times Matthew has kind of made it clear that this is festival time. Unleavened bread, Passover, Passover, Passover. You notice that? Now, for most of us, that's probably a festival we're not massively familiar with. We're familiar with like Creamfields, Glastonbury, those things are obvious. But for us, unleavened bread, Passover are kind of out with our knowledge. But what's unfamiliar to us would have been unbelievably familiar to Jesus and his disciples. It was a festival that came around once a year where almost all Jews would try and get to Jerusalem to celebrate it. And to try and get our heads into it and familiar with it, I want to kind of summarize 2 things that were central to it before we go any further. Here's the 2 things. It's about redemption remembered through a ritual, and it's about community created through a covenant. They're the 2 things we're going to loop around today, all right? Redemption remembered through a ritual, community created through a covenant. Happy so far? Vaguely. All right, let's try and work through the first one. Redemption remembered through a ritual. Now, that word redemption as a picture is the idea of being set free from slavery. This picture in front of us is a festival celebrating freedom. God's people, the Israelites, had been slaves in Egypt for 400 years under Pharaoh in Egypt. And everything on this table, everything at the festival was symbolizing something, celebrating something of God rescuing them out of slavery. Everything in the ritual was to help them remember redemption. Now, what's missing on our table, but was central for them, was a lamb. On the afternoon at the start of the festival, every family in Jerusalem would have taken one of their lambs to the temple so that a priest could sacrifice it. And the priest would take the blood of the lamb and pour it over the altar. He would take the fat of the lamb and burn it on the altar, and then he would give the rest of the meat to the family for them to roast for dinner. Why lamb? Because as Saul explained last week, the lamb linked to their liberty. A lamb was slain so that lives could be spared. Lambs were sacrificed so that this festival could be celebrated. Do you remember the story? And so when the sun set, the households from all around Jerusalem would gather together to remember that redemption through a ritual. And it would be the same ritual that happened every single year. I'm going to run it for you. It's all symbolized on the table. The first thing they would have done would they would have prayed a prayer of thanksgiving, and then they would have shared the first of 4 cups of wine. After they'd done that, it would be time to kind of have the first course. Symbolizing the bowl that's in the middle, it would have been filled with kind of bitter herbs. And the idea of bitter herbs was to kind of symbolize the bitter cruelty of the slavery that they'd endured for 400 years. They would have tasted it again. The bread in the plates was unleavened bread. Again, it symbolized what had happened when they had been rescued from slavery. There was no time to allow yeast to work through the dough to make the bread to rise, and so the bread was flat for freedom. When we fled, this is what the bread was like. At that point in the meal, after they'd had the first course, the youngest member of the household, youngest boy, who would have been Tommy, if it's in here, would have asked 4 questions about the ritual. And in response to Tommy asking the questions, the head of the household, like Saul, would have then run through and retold the entire story of redemption. They'd then sing. Same songs every year. At this point, Psalm 113 and Psalm 114. They would then share in the second cup of wine with more prayers before they then moved on to the main course of the lamb. And once they'd scranned the lamb, there would have been another prayer of thanksgiving, and they'd go on to cup number 3. After that, they'd sing more songs, same songs every year. They'd go Psalm 115, Psalm 116, Psalm 117, Psalm 118, and at which point they would share the 4th cup of the wine. And that's a ritual. Same every year, running through the story of redemption. One thing I found out this week was they very deliberately, it wasn't trestle tables like these bought from IKEA or whatever. It would have been a low-down table, and they would have all lounged on cushions. Even the cushions symbolized something. It was a beautiful picture of, we're no longer under the cruelty of chains. Cruel chains have gone, comfy cushions have come. Slaves didn't get cushions, but they're now free. And everything in this is retelling the story through the ritual. And it would have become so familiar in their heads that even the youngest child would have been able to recite it by rote pretty quickly. You got that first thing? Redemption remembered through ritual. But there's a second thing. Community created through a covenant. Now, the fact that this was a community thing is quite obvious, isn't it? Jesus is eating this with who? His boys. And so they're gathering together as a household, but they would have been one household amid hundreds in Jerusalem that would all have been running this ritual at exactly the same time, remembering their redemption. It's, again, obvious, but the Passover wasn't just about the redemption of one slave. It was about the redeeming of an entire people. And so this central event centered the community. It's actually beautiful as you read through some of the stuff. Provisions were made so that the poor were included. Invitations were sent so that outsiders could be included. This was a whole community event. It created community. However, the most significant thing was not that it was about community with your fellow redeemed, but that it was about community with your Redeemer. That's why I want to use the word covenant. It's not a massively kind of common word that we use. But it's a word that just talks about like cementing the formality of or the formalness of a relationship. So you start going out with a girl or a boy, you say you're seeing them. It's kind of casual. But when you want to cement that formally, you say vows in a church when you get married. That's a covenant. When you start working for somebody, you might just start working cash in hand, very casual. But when that gets cemented, what do? You sign a contract between an employer and employee. It's cementing the relationship. And that's what God says happened with his people. It's not a fling. It's not a casual thing. There's a covenant. He cemented it. And you need to see how these two things fit together. The people who were in cruel slavery to Pharaoh have been brought into covenant relationship with the Lord. The oppressor has gone, the Redeemer has come. And this ritual kind of reinforces the relationship. The festival kind of forges the fellowship between the redeemed and the Redeemer. Pharaoh's gone, the Lord is close. And that's why all the rituals that we talk through, it's not just about gathering with other people, it's about praising God. It's not just about the scran that you get, it's about the songs that are lifted to God. Do you get the point? Community is created, but it's a covenant that creates communion with the Lord. Right, you start to feel that you're getting your head into this festival. Redemption remembered through a ritual. What was the second one? Community created through a covenant. We can't go any further unless you get that. Just nod, even if you're not sure, and we can keep going. Are we okay? Now, what you need to get then is, Same ritual every year. Same food on the table, same drink on the table, same songs sung, same stories told, probably the same people in the household. The ritual is always the same. The pattern is always predictable, which means that by the time Jesus and his disciples are celebrating it, it had been done exactly the same for 1,500 years. If his disciples were between the ages of like late teens and maybe early 30s, they had each done it probably at least a couple of dozen times. They know this script, right? Which means what we're about to read in Matthew ought to be proper predictable. But what Jesus does is, into the kind of standard pattern, he inserts two very shocking pieces. And that's what we're going to work through. The disciples were expecting this to be normal. There are two aspects that are very novel. Let's keep reading. Here's the first one. Let's listen from verse 20. When evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12. And while they were eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." They were very sad, and they began to say to him, one after the other, "Surely you don't mean me, Lord." Jesus replied, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go just as it's written about him, but woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he'd not been born." Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, "Surely you don't mean me, Rabbi?" Jesus answered, "You've said so." Remember, this was a celebration of freedom. How do you think that changes the tone in the room? Awkward, isn't it? You can imagine the other boys going to Jesus, mate, you've misjudged this. Like, there's a time and a place. Now is not it. But actually, Jesus fronting up Judas at this moment is very purposeful, and it has a very sharp point. He wants you to see Judas at this festival. Here's why. In a festival remembering redemption, he is showing you very clearly the shackles of slavery. Do you remember the last thing we saw Judas doing? If you look, it's just before our passage. Verse 15, you watch as the chief priests count 30 pieces of silver into Judas's hands. And those coins in his hand are going to become chains around his wrists. No doubt Judas thought, with this money I am buying my freedom. The reality is it suffocated him to death. Jesus wants you to see, in a celebration of redemption, there's slavery. The other thing, remember, it's not just about redemption, it's about covenant community. What's he showing you? That in the midst of a festival about covenant community, you're seeing the blade of betrayal. It's so stark, isn't it? Everyone's coming together. Judas has brought a knife. And I've no doubt again that Judas thought that in kind of sidling up beside the chief priest, he thought he was going to find a brotherhood that would exclude him from the suffering he saw was coming to Jesus. What he doesn't realize is that the very men he is sidling up next to are going to do him dirty and hang him out to dry. Now, Jesus is very clear. Judas's role is quite unique. He says in verse 24 that this is part of the plan written by the hand of God. It's also clear this is part of a plan wanted by the heart of Judas. There are two things that are going in different directions but are achieving the same thing, like clocks in a watch. But although Judas is unique in his timing, I think his heart is pretty common, isn't it? My guess is that there's probably people in the room who have got something in Judas's heart going, maybe it's time to sack following Jesus and going back to what the world calls freedom. Maybe there's something in us that goes, I'm sick of the flack that I get for being a Christian. If I go back to my old life, life would get better. But Jesus fronts Judas up at this festival to show you that if you drift from this being central, you will drift into oppression and into alienation. Judas is a reminder, you centralize anything else in your life, like 30 silver coins, it will waste your life and end your life in woe. So it is a diversion from the ritual, but it is a thing that is showing you what is central to the ritual. Do you get the point? Right, let's go to the second one. The second one is actually much more radical. The first point, Jesus is making a point about Judas. In this second one, Jesus is making the point of everything about himself. Look at verse 24. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying. Now, remember at this point, the disciples have done this loads of times. They would have known what was meant to come next. There was a kind of special prayer that you would have prayed. You would have said these words, "Blessed are you, O Lord our God, the King of the universe, who brought forth bread from the earth." It was already tripping off the boys' tongues. It's not what Jesus says. He says, "Take and eat. This is my body." Does the same thing with the cup. Verse 27. Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, and again, they would have known what was going to come next. The normal words were, "Blessed are you, our Lord, our God, King of the universe, creator of the fruit of the vine." But that's not what Jesus says. He says, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." It's a new ritual. He's actually disturbing 1,500 years of tradition and instituting a new ritual. And it's a new ritual because there's a new redemption. Jesus is saying, this is no longer about the body of a lamb. This is about the body of the Son of Man. This is no longer about the blood of a lamb. This is about the blood of the Son of Man. This is no longer about captivity 1,500 years ago. This is about a crucifixion that's about to happen tomorrow. This is not about slavery to Pharaoh in Egypt. This is about being set free from slavery to sin in your life. The death of Jesus on the cross is about redemption for you. He is buying your freedom from sin at the cost of death to him. That's what these things on the table are picturing. His body broken so that you could be made whole. His death blood to become your lifeblood. That's his point. New ritual for a new redemption. Because he's saying, do you know what? Tomorrow, boys, there is going to be something new to remember. One of the things that had never struck me, and I might be wrong on this, but I think Jesus and his disciples are actually celebrating the Passover a day early. They're eating it on the Thursday night. Everyone else in Jerusalem, it would have been the next day, the Friday, that they would have taken their lambs to the temple for the priest to sacrifice them. But Jesus and his boys are going a day early. Why? Because the next day, when everyone else is watching their lambs slaughtered at the temple, at the very same time, their lamb, Jesus, would be being slaughtered on a cross. And this is the new thing he says you need to remember. I wonder if we've forgotten how traumatic it would have been for the disciples to observe the cross. He says to them, this is my body, and I want you to remember it. And they would have watched as his body was broken, flesh torn. He says, this is my blood, and I want you to remember it. And we probably forget how traumatic it would have been for his disciples to see blood pour from him, his life emptying before their eyes. And yet this is the thing that he wants them to remember. Lots of us who struggle from PTSD live lives trying to forget the most traumatic things, and Jesus is doing the opposite. He says, I want you to remember this. I want you to remember this is not my body being taken from me. This is me giving it for you. He says, this is not them executing me. This is me redeeming you. Remember me redeeming you. And I wonder if we've lost sight of how scandalous this is. Or at least in some ways, because we've done it a bunch of times, we've lost sight of, or maybe we've sanitized it. Jesus says, eat my body, drink my blood. For a Jew, they would never have let blood pass their lips. Never. I mean, if you're new to all this, you're probably going in and you go, what a bunch of cannibals. And it does have that. What a bunch of whack jobs kind of centering themselves on this cannibalistic ritual. And that's what Christians were called in the first century. Cannibals. It's a graphic picture capturing an even more graphic picture. But that's Jesus' point. What I have done, you need to receive. What I have given, you need to take. What I have paid for, you need to consume. He says, what I've finished, you need to have faith in. What I have won for you, you need to celebrate. And so he says, take, eat my body, drink my blood. This is to be the scandalous thing that becomes central for his people. New redemption remembered through a new ritual. And it's to be recurring for us because we're so prone to drift, aren't we? Maybe you felt that in the last week. Like Judas, adrift into lust. Or like Peter, adrift into self-confidence. Or like all of the disciples soon, adrift into fear. And Jesus pulls us back to the center and says, you will starve in slavery if you don't satisfy yourself here. You will end up back in chains if you don't center yourself here. If you're not a Christian, we get how weird this is. But what Jesus wants you to understand is, and comprehend, this is central to Christianity. You are a slave to sin. You don't believe me? Try and stop. And you're a slave to sin who will die in sin unless Jesus sets you free. But this is a picture for you to see. He purchased your redemption by his own body and blood. And the most beautiful thing about it, maybe the most simple thing that you can miss, is he doesn't say, pay for it. He doesn't say, earn it. He doesn't say, work for it. What does he say? Take it. And maybe today's the day for the first time you take what Jesus has freely given. Right, we need to keep on going. Last thing. We said Passover is about two things. This new ritual is about two things. Redemption remembered through a ritual, new redemption, new ritual. But then also community created through a covenant. Look at verse 28 again. We're almost done. He says, "This is my blood of the covenant, poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I won't drink from the fruit of this vine from now on until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. So this ritual does make you look back to the cross. But the ritual also makes you look around at the church. He says the blood is poured out for many. When you consume Jesus, he connects you to his community, a new community. It's not a community of Jewish people going to Jerusalem. It's not a community just made up of where you are from or who your family is. It is a community that is made up of those who have put their faith in Jesus. That's why unity is such an important part when we come to the Lord's table. Our togetherness is both declared and defended at this table. This is what unites us. But this is not just about community with the church. This is also about looking back to the cross, looking around at one another, but looking forward to the climax of the covenant. Did you notice what Jesus said? He's not going to drink these cups again until when? Until he drinks with you in his Father's kingdom. This is the night before he dies a horrendous death on a cross, but he looks beyond his death on a cross to his resurrection kingdom. He looks beyond his death on a cross to a new feast, a new festival, a new celebration. He looks beyond his death on a cross to the point where believers will enjoy the covenant of knowing Jesus in a world that is made new. This is just a foretaste of that future. This is just a little keepsake that points you to the climax of the covenant. Which again means, if you're a Christian, don't drift to things like 30 silver coins that will never outlast your life. Center yourself on the covenant that continues forever. Jesus' resurrection assures you of a new kingdom and a better celebration. But if you're not a Christian, he is simply saying to you, there is something beyond death. The lamb dies, the lion rises. The cup of curse is drank so that the cup of blessing can be celebrated. But do you see what he's saying? It is possible to live this life in a way that it was better if you'd never been born. He's assuring people of the reality of hell as sure as he is assuring people of the reality of his new creation. But he's put you here today around this central table today to call you out of your chains and to bring you into his covenant. And the simple invitation is, take it, eat, drink, and celebrate his redemption.